Montana Territory, August 1874. The sun was dropping fast behind the distant pines when Holden Zane spotted the girl kneeling in the dust beside a dying horse. He reined in his gelding, boots crunching against the dry earth as he dismounted. The animal on the ground was a chestnut mare, foam around her lips, flanks heaving. And beside her sleeves rolled, skirt stained with blood and sweat, was the most determined woman he had ever seen. "Do not come closer," she snapped without looking up. Her hands were pressed tight against the mare's side, trying to stop the bleeding. Holden paused. "You do not have enough cloth to stop that. You need help," I said, her head jerked up. Her face was flushed, brown eyes fierce. "She is all I have left." "I am not here to take her from you," Holden said, voice steady. "Just let me help." She hesitated. Her hands were shaking. Holden stepped forward, shrugging off his coat. He tore the sleeve free and dropped to his knees opposite her. "Where is the wound?" "Under the girth line. She was spooked by a cougar and fell into barbed wire." He leaned in, careful. The mare snorted weakly, eyes rolling. Holden found the gash, deep, ugly. If she had not bled out already, she would soon. "She is not going to make it," he said quietly. "I know," the woman whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But I have to try." Holden pressed the cloth to the gash anyway, not because it would save the mare, but because this woman needed someone to try with her. The mare died 10 minutes later. The woman's shoulders caved as she buried her face in the animal's neck. Holden stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she spoke. "Her name was Juniper. I raised her from a foal." "I am sorry." She straightened, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Thank you for helping." "Holden Zane," he said, offering his hand. She took it. "Harriet Boone." They shook once solid. "You are a long way out from any town, Miss Boone." "I live about 4 miles east, my brother's old homestead. He passed last winter." "Alone?" Her eyes flicked up. "No." "With my son. His name is Zeke." Holden nodded. "Let me help you bury her." They worked until the stars came out. Holden dug the hole while Harriet stood by, holding a lantern, her face pale but steady. When it was done, she laid one hand on the mare's forehead, whispered something Holden could not hear, and stepped back. He filled the grave. "You need a ride home," he said when the last of the dirt was patted down. "I can walk." "It is dark. Let me take you." She hesitated, then nodded once. Harriet rode behind him, arms around his waist, quiet. They reached the homestead an hour later, a small clapboard house and a barn, both worn but sturdy. A light flickered in the front window. "Zeke'll be worried," she said, sliding down from the horse. "He is 6. Holden stayed in the saddle. "You have enough firewood, water? I can manage." I was not questioning that. Something in his voice made her pause. She looked up at him. "You are not like most men." "No," he said, "I am not." She turned toward the house. "Come in." "At least for supper." He tied off the gelding and followed her inside. The boy Zeke was small, freckled, barefoot. He ran to his mother, then looked up at Holden with wide eyes. "This is Holden," she said gently. "He helped with Juniper." Zeke tilted his head. "You got a gun?" "Yes." "You ever shoot a grizzly?" "No," Holden said, "but I stared one down once." Zeke's eyes got even wider. Harriet gave a soft laugh, then ushered her son toward the kitchen. "Go wash up." They sat down to cornbread and beans, simple but warm. Holden ate like a man who had not tasted a home-cooked meal in months. Afterward, he stood. "Thank you, I should ride on." "You can stay in the barn," she said, surprising him. "If you want." He studied her face. She had not put her guard down, but something had shifted. "All right," he said. "Thank you." She walked him to the door. "Good night, Harriet." "Good night, Holden." He stepped into the dark, boots crunching gravel, and disappeared toward the barn. Harriet stood in the doorway a moment longer, arms folded against the chill. She looked up at the stars, then back toward the barn. Inside, Holden laid his bedroll on the hay and stared at the rafters. He had ridden into the valley for supplies. He had not expected to find her. He had not expected to feel this. He had known her for less than a day. But already, something in her had settled under his skin, quiet strength, fierce love, the way she had fought for a dying horse like it was her last chance. That kind of heart was rare. Holden turned on his side, listening to the wind outside. He had come here for a bag of flour and a coil of rope. Instead, he had found Harriet Boone. Morning came quiet, with mist curled low over the grass and a breeze brushing through the cottonwoods that lined the creek behind the barn. Holden stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand resting on the gate, watching the fog lift in slow ribbons. A rooster called somewhere off to the right. Smoke had just begun to rise from the chimney. He had not meant to sleep so well. Bootsteps padded behind him, small, unhurried. Zeke appeared at his elbow, holding a tin cup in both hands. "Mama said you take your coffee black," the boy said, offering it up. Holden took it with a nod. "Appreciate it." Zeke scratched his ear with a knuckle, glancing toward the field. "You gonna help us today?" wasn't asked. "Well, I am asking." He gave a serious look, freckles tight across his nose. "We got a busted fence. Mama says we'll lose chickens if it don't get fixed." Holden sipped the coffee, eyes on the boy. "Then I reckon I'm helping." Zeke's face lit bright, and he took off running back toward the house, his bare feet flicking up dust. Holden found Harriet near the coop, sleeves rolled again, a hammer in her belt. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Your boy's persuasive," he said. "I figured he'd try something." She passed him a coil of wire and a bag of bent nails. They walked the fence line without talking, the air still damp, boots sinking into soft earth where the creek had overflowed weeks back. At the broken post, she crouched, brushing away weeds with practiced fingers. "This one rotted through. I saw it leaning yesterday." Holden helped her haul a replacement down from the shed. She held it steady while he drove it into the ground, sweat threading down his spine by the time it was sunk firm. She watched his work without comment, her own hands busy straightening the rails. When they paused to drink from the gourd she'd brought, she tilted her head toward the barn. "You planning to ride out today?" "I was." She looked past him toward the hill. "There's still plenty that needs doing." Holden nodded once. "Then I'll stay another night." They didn't talk more on it. By noon, they'd patched 2 more breaks and cleared a fallen limb from the southeast corner. Zeke brought them bread and jam balanced on a wooden board. He set it down between them, then dropped beside Holden without asking permission. "Where do you sleep when you're not here?" he asked, mouth full. Holden chewed slowly. "Wherever there's sky." "You don't get lonely?" Harriet gave the boy a look, but Holden didn't seem bothered. "Sometimes, but I guess I got used to it." "I think people aren't made for just sky," Zeke said. "They need tables and chairs and somebody else's voice." Holden stared at the boy a moment, then looked at Harriet. "He always talk like that," she smiled faintly. "Only when he's thinking hard." They spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through a collapsed wagon frame behind the barn. Harriet said she needed the wheels for a cart she'd been trying to build since spring. Holden pried off the rusted bolts while she kept the board steady. Once, their hands brushed. She didn't pull away. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the wheels were leaned upright by the shed, and Zeke was asleep by the hearth, a wool blanket tucked under his chin. Harriet poured Holden a glass of cider and handed it to him without a word. They sat on the porch together, the sky gone purple above the hills. "You always pass through alone?" she asked. "Mostly." "Where were you headed?" He tipped the glass against his lip. "Didn't have a place in mind." She studied the edge of the yard where the fence line vanished into shadow. "Most men that come this far out, they're running from something or looking for something they lost." He didn't answer right away. Then, "Sometimes it's both." She traced a finger along the grain of the armrest. "I keep thinking I've already lost everything worth missing." "You haven't." The words hung there a while before she nodded. "You're not like anyone I've known," she said. Holden looked at her, quiet. "Neither are you." She stood, setting her empty glass on the rail. "There's fresh blankets in the loft. You're welcome to them." He rose too, slower. "Thank you." Their eyes met a beat longer than necessary. Then she turned and stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. Holden stood there a moment, lantern light flickering behind the curtains, the night pressing in cool around him. Whatever he'd been chasing across the hills, it wasn't out there anymore. It was here, behind that door. And it had a name. Harriet Boone. The morning after the fence was mended, Harriet found Holden sitting cross-legged in the vegetable patch behind the house, examining a row of struggling squash vines. His hat was pushed back, revealing a faint scar along his temple, pale against sun-worn skin. He didn't hear her approach. "You know something about plants?" she asked, keeping her voice mild. He glanced up. "Enough to see these aren't getting what they need." She leaned on the shovel she'd brought. "They've been yellowing since early July. I thought it was the heat." Heat do it some, but your soil's leached out. Too many seasons without a fallow. She crouched beside him, brushing dirt from her skirt. I ain't had the time to rest a plot. There's only 2 hands to work the ground. 3 now, he said. She studied him, the way he said it like it wasn't a favor, just fact. I could put you to work clearing the northeast stretch, she said after a beat. That ground's been choked with thistle since spring. Point me to it. They spent the morning cutting low brush and uprooting stubborn roots with the mattock. Harriet worked without pause, even when sweat lined her jaw and her palms grew raw. Holden didn't offer to take her tools or lighten her load. He matched her pace, no more, no less. When they stopped, she poured water from the tin pail into 2 mugs. They drank under the shade of a wind-twisted pine, the only one left from the stand that had once rimmed her brother's wheat field. He die sudden, Holden asked, not unkind. She set her mug down in the grass. Influenza. Winter came early and we couldn't get to Fort Benton for help. He lasted 3 days. Holden nodded, eyes on the horizon. He wasn't always easy to live with, she added, but he tried to do right by Zeke. You were close, not always, but blood's blood. He didn't press further. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded scrap of canvas. Inside was a small tin of salve, pine-scented and thick. For your hands, he said, passing it to her. She took it, eyes curious. You carry this around. Old injury taught me to be ready. She uncapped it, rubbed a dab between her fingers, then handed it back. Thank you. You ever think of hiring someone? He asked. I did, once. He took the last of our sugar and left the barn door open. Mule wandered off and never came back. Holden tipped his head. That'd sour a person. I stopped expecting help after that. That why you let me stay? She hesitated. Zeke trusted you. Holden glanced toward the house. He's got good sense. They spent the rest of the day hauling stones from the creek to mark the new boundary. Harriet worked in silence, pausing only to check the sun's position or call out to Zeke when he wandered too close to the water. As dusk laid its long shadows across the fields, Holden carried the last stone up the ridge and set it in place. Harriet stood beside him, arms crossed, face streaked with dirt. You're not restless, she said suddenly. No, most men get twitchy when they stop moving. I've been moving too long. She turned toward the house. Supper'll be late. I didn't plan on clearing a full acre. I can cook. She narrowed her eyes, but amusement touched her mouth. You saying you're better at it than me? I'm saying I can give you a break. She stepped around him, brushing his sleeve with her fingertips as she passed. Well then. Let's see if you can make something edible. Inside, Holden moved through the kitchen with an ease that surprised her. He didn't ask where things were, just opened the right cupboards, lit the stove with a practiced twist of the flint, and set beans to simmer with onion and salt pork. The smell filled the house, warm and sharp. Zeke watched from the table, chin propped on his hands. You cook like Mama used to before Uncle Asa got sick. Harriet glanced over. You remember that? She'd hum sometimes. You don't hum anymore. Holden didn't look up, but he stirred the pot a little slower. After they ate, Zeke fell asleep where he sat, cheek pressed to the table. Harriet lifted him gently and carried him to bed. When she returned, Holden was washing the dishes with water he'd heated on the stove. You always that handy? She asked. I like things done right. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You ever settle anywhere? He dried his hands. Once, didn't take. What happened? He hung the cloth on the hook. War ended. Home didn't feel like home anymore. She stepped into the lamplight. And now, he looked at her for a long moment. Now feels different. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching him like she was trying to read something between the lines of his face. Finally, she said, there's room in the loft if you want to come inside tonight. It's not much warmer, but the roof don't leak. He didn't ask what changed her mind. He just nodded. All right. As she turned to climb the stairs, Holden followed quietly, the lamplight soft between them, the boards creaking under their weight. That night, the wind picked up outside, but neither of them noticed it. The house held their silence close, and something steady began to root itself in the quiet. Not a promise, not yet, but something strong enough to grow. The first frost came early that year, creeping over the fields in the night and leaving the squash patch limp by morning. Holden stepped outside with his rifle slung over one shoulder and saw Harriet already in the yard, sleeves down now, a scarf tied at her throat. She was gathering the last of the onions, dirt clinging to her fingers, her breath a ghost in the air. He crossed over and crouched beside her, reaching for a tangled bulb near the fence post. "I was thinking," he said, brushing soil from the onion, "I could take the rifle up through the ridge trail, see if anything's moving low enough to bring down." She nodded, placing a handful into the basket. "We've got salt, but no fresh meat since midsummer. You know the trail well enough." "Well enough to come back." She didn't answer right away. Then, "I've got a neighbor 2 miles west, old German fellow. He's got a smokehouse and trades fair. If you get a buck, we could keep half through winter." Holden stood and adjusted the rifle strap. "I'll leave before sun's high." He left without fanfare, boots crunching frost as he disappeared behind the barn. Harriet finished the onions alone. She washed them at the pump, fingers turning red in the cold, and strung them to dry under the eaves. Zeke helped her carry wood inside, dragging the smaller pieces and asking if he'd be allowed to go with Holden next time. "No," she said, tying her apron on. "Not until you can gut a rabbit without gagging. I could if you'd let me try." "You still cried over that bird you chased into the glass window." Zeke sulked but carried the kindling without further argument. The day passed slow. Harriet churned butter while rain threatened behind the clouds. She checked the roofline near the chimney and patched a gap with old canvas. There wasn't much else to do. After supper, Zeke fell asleep by the stove with a book folded over his chest, and she set about mending the tear in Holden's coat where the seam had split under the arm. She didn't ask herself why. Outside, the wind came in short sighs across the grass. She lit the lantern and left it near the window. Holden returned 2 hours after full dark, dragging a young mule deer across the yard, canvas sack slung over his shoulder. Harriet opened the door before he knocked. "Cold's coming down fast," he said, voice low. She stepped aside without a word. He handed her the sack, heavy with dry mushrooms and a handful of wild apples. "Found a patch near the base of the ridge," he said. "No tracks but mine." She took the sack and set it on the table. "You hungry? I could eat." She poured the last of the broth into a pan and set it on the stove. He washed his hands at the basin, quiet, then pulled the mended coat from the back of the chair. He turned it over once, then looked across the room at her. "You sew that." "I wasn't going to let it hang there falling apart." He folded the coat and set it aside. "Thank you." She ladled the stew into 2 bowls and passed him one. They sat across from each other, elbows on the table, steam rising between them. "You always hunted?" she asked. "Started when I was 9. My father got sick the second winter after the war started. I hunted or we didn't eat." She nodded once. "Mine taught me to trap, but I was never good at it. Asa used to say I didn't have the patience for baiting." "You've got plenty of patience for other things." She looked up. "Do I? I've seen how you move through a day." She didn't answer, just pushed the bowl aside when she was done and leaned her arms on the table. Her hair had come loose at the sides, and the firelight caught in the strands. "I keep thinking this won't last," she said finally. "Having someone else here, the quiet not feeling so sharp." He didn't flinch. "I'm not in a hurry to leave." "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind." They sat with that between them for a long minute. Then she stood, took the bowls, and rinsed them in the sink. He watched her move, the way her hands didn't tremble like they had that first evening. "You want to stay in the loft again?" she asked, not turning. "I'd rather sleep here," he said, voice even. "If you're asking." She dried her hands slow, then faced him. "Zeke's asleep. He doesn't wake easy." Holden stood and crossed to her. He didn't reach for her, just waited. "You think it's too soon?" she asked. "I don't think anything about this is wrong." She looked at him a long time. Then she nodded once, and he followed her through the narrow hall, past the soft breaths of a sleeping child, into the room at the back with the quilted bed and the window that faced east. No words passed between them after that. Only the quiet rustle of clothes, the creak of old floorboards, the breathless hush of 2 people who had waited longer than they'd realized. When morning came, the frost had thickened. But inside, the house was warm. By late October, the trees at the edge of Harriet's land stood bare, branches stark against a pale sky. Morning light came slow, filtered through low clouds, and the air held that stillness that falls before snow. Holden split wood behind the barn while Zeke traced letters in the ash near the hearth, his tongue between his teeth as he practiced the shape of an R. Inside, Harriet stood at the kitchen table, sleeves buttoned, eyes on a ledger open to the last page. She tapped the pencil once, then wrote a number with careful strokes. When Holden stepped in, brushing sawdust from his coat, she didn't look up. "We've got enough flour and beans to last past December," she said, "but lamp oil's low. And the roof above the pantry's beginning to sag." He hung his coat by the door and crossed to look over her notes. "We could cut fresh pine from the ridge. I saw a stand just past the old creek, tight grain, good for bracing." She set the pencil down. "You ever build a roof before?" "I've framed enough to know what'll hold." She met his gaze and something in her steadied. "Then I'll trust your eye." Zeke looked up from the hearth. "When the snow comes, can we make a sled?" Harriet raised her brows. "You planning to pull it yourself?" "I thought Holden could." Holden crouched beside the boy. "You get me the right rope and I'll give you one ride. Just one." Zeke grinned wide and went back to his letters with renewed purpose. Later that day, Harriet walked the back pasture while Holden worked inside the barn stripping bark from the felled logs. She carried a basket on her hip, filling it with the last of the wind-fallen apples. The trees had given less this year, but she took what was left, careful not to waste a single one. Her boots left soft prints in the thinning grass. When she came back through the yard, Holden was standing at the barn doors, sleeves rolled and hands streaked with sap. She paused. "I was thinking," she said, shifting the basket, "after the roof's done, we could use the rest of the timber to extend the coop. Come spring, I'd like to keep more hens." He nodded. "That'd give you enough eggs to trade." "I want more than just enough." Holden leaned against the doorframe. "What do you want?" She looked at him, quiet. "A life that's not always scraping to hold together. You ever think of letting someone help build it?" "I've thought of it." He stepped toward her, slow, and she didn't back away. "And I'm not afraid of it anymore." He reached for the basket, taking it from her arms. "Then we'll start with the roof." Harriet didn't answer, but her hand brushed his when she let go of the handle. The following days passed in steady rhythm. Holden cut beams and hammered braces by lantern light, while Harriet sealed the pantry shelves and lined the windows with burlap to stop the draft. Zeke gathered kindling and told stories about the snow bear he planned to build once the first storm came. The night the roof was finished, Harriet cooked a stew with the last of the venison and a handful of dried herbs she'd saved from summer. They ate by the fire, the lamplight low. Zeke fell asleep with his head in Harriet's lap, one hand curled in her skirt. Holden watched them for a while, then stood to stoke the fire. He didn't speak until Harriet shifted the boy gently and stood beside him. "There's a way this could go quiet," he said. "Slow and sure, if that's what you want." Harriet looked up at him. "I don't want quiet, I want solid. I want something that holds." Holden's hand reached for hers. "Then stay with me." "I already have." And she had. Since the first moment she'd let him kneel beside her in the dust beside a dying mare, since she'd let him work the fence without asking for more than his name. Holden bent his head and she rose up on her toes, and the kiss they shared was not a beginning but a settling. A deep breath after long silence. A place to rest. The first snow came 2 days later, soft and slow, blanketing the fields in white. Zeke woke early and pulled his boots on over thick socks, calling for Holden before the sun had risen. Harriet stood at the door, wrapped in Holden's coat, watching her son, and the man she'd come to trust pack snow into a sled frame. She stepped outside, boots crunching over the drift, and Holden looked up, eyes bright. "Come ride with us," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Zeke whooped as they all climbed on, and the sled rushed down the gentle hill behind the barn, snow flurrying around them. Harriet laughed, the sound full and free, and Holden's hand held hers firm all the way down. That night, after Zeke had fallen asleep with his cheeks pink from cold and joy, Holden poured 2 tin cups of warm cider and they sat by the fire. "I sent word to Mackin," he said. "He's got a team in Helena that could bring lumber come spring, enough to build a second room." Harriet turned to him, cup cradled in her palms. "What would we do with a second room?" He smiled, soft. "I thought maybe we'd fill it." She reached across the space between them and touched his cheek. "You think this house is big enough for all that?" "With you," he said. I figure it's enough for anything. She leaned in then, and their foreheads touched, and the fire crackled low, and outside snow kept falling, soft as breath. They didn't need words after that. Just the warmth of each other, the weight of shared days, and the knowledge that what they'd built wasn't fragile. It was earned. They wed in early spring, beneath the same pine where they'd first cleared thistle and root. Zeke stood beside them with a ribbon tied around his arm and a grin he couldn't hide. Harriet wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin stored in a cedar chest, and Holden carved her a ring from the heartwood of the pine he'd felled himself. Neighbors came. The old German man brought smoked meat, and a woman from the next valley brought flowers wrapped in linen. They ate on long benches in the yard, and when the sun set, Holden pulled Harriet close and danced with her to the sound of Zeke's wooden whistle. Later, when the guests had gone and the stars were high, Harriet stood beside Holden on the porch, her hand on his chest. "We'll make it through the next winter," she said. He kissed her hair. "And the one after that," and they did. Years passed. They built the second room. Zeke grew taller than Holden by 17 and rode to town each week to fetch supplies. Harriet kept hens and sold eggs and wrote letters for neighbors who couldn't hold a pen. Holden worked the land until his hands stiffened, then taught Zeke how to take it on. But always, at the end of each day, they returned to the same fire, the same porch, the same quiet space where love had first taken root, and it held. Through snow and storm and drought, it held.